Hey guys, tonight we wander somewhere warm, ancient, and strangely familiar. You're in the cradle of civilization, the land between the rivers, the place where humans first learned to tame the wild into something edible. The air hums with heat even at dawn, and a thin line of gold spreads across the mud brick rooftops. You stretch, feeling the rough weave of linen against your skin. Outside, a rooster is attempting to sound impressive, and a few goats are bleating like they've already had enough of the day. You're about to spend your morning learning how the first bakers, your distant culinary ancestors, made bread long before steel, yeast packets, or that fancy stand mixer sitting in your kitchen. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Between the heat, the scorpions, and the lack of running water, modern comfort is a few thousand years away. But still, you're here, and that counts for something. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing who's drifting to sleep across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the sun fully climbs, in a small clay brick home tucked near the edge of a Mesopotamian village. The room smells faintly of ashes and something earthy, barley crusts left from yesterday's meal. The floor beneath you is cool mud, smoothed flat and still damp from the night air. A clay pot in the corner holds water drawn from the river yesterday, though it's gathered a thin film of dust overnight. You splash your face, feeling it trickle down your neck, and step outside just as the first real light hits the Tigris in the distance. The river doesn't rush. It lingers. The current is slow and brown, thick with silt, and every year it floods just enough to gift this region with rich, sticky soil. Without it, there'd be no crops, no villages, no bread. The people here call this place the land between rivers. Sumer to some, Akkad to others. But to you, it just feels alive. Smoke rises lazily from nearby ovens. You can smell yesterday's firewood still smoldering inside them. Tamarisk and palm husks, giving off that smoky sweetness that clings to everything. A few women have already started kneading dough in the open air, their hands moving in steady circles like a dance they've done since childhood. Children dart between them, carrying baskets of grain or fetching water. The rhythm of the day is already set. Grain, grind, bake, repeat. You stretch again and feel your back pop. Civilization, as it turns out, doesn't come with ergonomic furniture. A man shuffles past you, balancing a reed basket full of barley heads. The grain is coarse, golden, and stubbornly scratchy to the touch. Barley is everywhere here. Wheat, too, though barley is the tough survivor, the one that can handle bad weather, salty soil, and a general lack of mercy from the gods. You reach out, running your fingers through the spikes, and a few loose grains fall into your palm. They look unimpressive. Tiny, hard, unassuming, but they're the building blocks of everything around you. The bread, the beer, the taxes, even the temples. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians first cultivated barley deliberately or whether it simply volunteered itself, thriving in human-disturbed ground until people realized it was good to eat. Either way, it's the grain that made this place possible. Barley doesn't just feed you, it pays you. Bakers are allotted it, priests bless it, and kings measure their wealth by it. You might say barley was the first true currency, though it didn't fit well in wallets. You walk toward a nearby courtyard where a family is breaking their morning fast. The father sits cross-legged with a round of flatbread torn open, steam escaping from its soft center. He dips a piece into a small bowl of oil, sesame maybe, and chews with slow satisfaction. The bread is thick, slightly gritty, but it's warm, fragrant, and filling. The mother offers you a piece, smiling, and you take it with both hands. It's chewy, slightly sour, and still carries the faint taste of yesterday's smoke. You think about how something so ordinary, so simple, could hold so much history. This bread is a direct descendant of the earliest experiments in agriculture. It's older than writing, older than wheels. People once gathered wild grains from riverbanks, ground them between stones, mixed them with water, and baked the paste on hot rocks. Somewhere along the line, they realized, hey, this tastes better cooked. And just like that, dinner became destiny. Down the lane, you hear the rhythmic scrape of stone against stone, the unmistakable sound of a quern, a hand-grinding tool. A woman kneels beside it, pushing a heavy upper stone over a flat lower one, grinding barley into coarse flour. She hums softly as she works, sweat glistening on her arms. Her young daughter joins in, scooping the powder into a small bowl. It's slow work, hypnotic even, and as you watch, the rasping rhythm begins to sound almost like a heartbeat. Bread doesn't just appear, it demands labor, patience, and strong shoulders. Historians still argue whether men or women did most of the grinding, but in the clay reliefs and cylinder seals left behind, it's often women shown doing it. Their hands fed entire cities long before machines took over. Some scholars even suggest that the daily need for grain processing helped define gendered labor roles, and maybe even inspired the earliest communal baking spaces. You crouch to take a closer look. The flour is uneven, speckled with bits of bran. You imagine the texture in your mouth. Dense, nutty, faintly smoky. It's not the fluffy loaf of a Parisian bakery, but it's honest food, the kind that keeps you walking, thinking, surviving. A cat slinks by, tail high, hoping for crumbs. You drop a pinch of flour, and it sniffs before turning away in contempt. Even ancient cats, it seems, had standards. In the distance, temple bells, or something close to bells, begin to clang. It's a sound both sacred and practical. The ziggurat at the town center is stirring with priests and attendants. Bread will be baked today, not just for families, but for gods. The idea that divinity could hunger was taken quite seriously here. The gods of Mesopotamia were not abstract. They wanted offerings they could smell, touch, taste, even if symbolically. The rising steam of bread was, to them, a kind of incense, a gesture of gratitude from mortals who knew their place. You wander toward the temple and notice something peculiar. A pile of discarded loaves, slightly burnt, stacked neatly in a corner. Offerings that didn't make the cut. Some are marked with tiny seals, symbols pressed into the dough before baking, indicating which household gave them. Bread as bureaucracy. You can't help but smile. Somewhere in the ancient world, a scribe was already noting down how many loaves went missing in transit. The sun climbs higher, flooding the city in harsh light. The air thickens with dust, and the scent of baking bread mingles with livestock and river mud. A baker waves you over, offering a warm round just out of the oven. It's rough, uneven, a bit charred on the edges, but it's perfect. You tear off a piece and taste the earliest form of civilization. Grain, heat, and a hint of salt from someone's sweaty hand. For a moment, you realize that every loaf baked since has been an echo of this one. From your modern sourdough starter bubbling in a jar to the supermarket sandwich loaf wrapped in plastic, it all began here with a few handfuls of barley and a clay oven. You take another bite. It's earthy, chewy, comforting. The city hums around you, alive with trade, chatter, and the steady rhythm of daily life. Somewhere, a scribe scratches lines into a wet clay tablet, recording grain rations for the week. Somewhere else, a farmer curses the river's whims. But for now, in this small corner of the world, you have bread, warmth, and the quiet certainty that this simple act of baking is civilization's soft beginning. You start your morning walk through the narrow alleys of the village, tracing the scent of crushed grain that clings to the air like dust. The sun is higher now, bright, golden and already uncomfortably hot, and the light turns the baked clay walls into glowing amber. Every few steps, your sandals stick slightly to the packed mud, still damp from last night's dew. Someone nearby is shaking grain in a winnowing basket, and the faint hiss of husks separating from kernels sounds like whispering sand.
Today, you're going to learn where all this begins, how the humble grains of barley and emmer wheat became the backbone of civilization, because before there were kings, temples, or cities, there were seeds.
You make your way toward the edge of the settlement, where fields stretch toward the horizon in a shimmering haze. The people here might not know words like agriculture or domestication, but they know every curve of the land, every turn of the river. You kneel at the field's edge, running your hand through a patch of barley stalks. The heads are heavy and golden, their bristles brushing against your fingers. A few thousand years ago, these would have been wild, fragile, scattering their seeds at the lightest touch. But generations of careful gathering and planting changed that. The grains you hold now stay put until harvested. That one little quirk, non-shattering seed heads, is the genetic magic that made farming possible. Historians still argue whether this change happened by accident or design. Some say early people simply preferred to gather grains that didn't fall apart as easily, unintentionally selecting sturdier strains over time. Others believe someone, somewhere, noticed that planting seeds from the easy stalks produced better yields. Either way, it wasn't a grand plan. It was curiosity, patience, and the same instinct that makes you check whether your houseplants have sprouted overnight. You stand and squint across the fields. Small figures move in slow rhythm, bent under the sun. They're using sickles made from curved reeds set with tiny flint blades, sharp enough to slice through stalks, but dull just as fast. Each harvest is a race against heat, pests, and exhaustion. But as the crops fall in neat rows, there's a quiet pride to it too. The land between the rivers is fertile, yes, but it's not forgiving. Too much flood and everything drowns. Too little and the soil cracks like pottery. You step closer to one of the farmers, a broad-shouldered man with a headscarf to keep the sun off his neck. He pauses to straighten his back, wiping sweat with his forearm, then offers you a handful of freshly cut heads of barley. You crush them lightly in your palm, revealing the seeds inside, small, oval, and surprisingly hard. They smell faintly sweet, almost grassy. He laughs softly as he watches you inspect them. You might not understand his language, but you both know that this handful of grain is life. The farmer gestures toward a group of oxen dragging a wooden plow across the next field. It's a simple tool, just a sharpened stick with a handle, but it transforms the earth, carving furrows in neat lines. A child follows behind, tossing seeds by hand, letting them scatter like tiny promises. And somewhere behind you, a woman chants a short prayer, half song, half plea, to ensure the coming floodwaters are kind. Mesopotamian farmers lived at the mercy of the rivers. The annual flood could make or break a season, so they built canals and ditches to guide the water. They didn't know the science of irrigation, but they knew its rhythm. The land, they said, had moods. The rivers could be generous or spiteful. You crouch by one of the irrigation channels. Water trickles slowly through it, reflecting sunlight in bright shards. You trail your fingers in, feeling the coolness against your skin. It's muddy, yes, but it's also alive, filled with the same silt that gives the soil its richness. Without this flood-borne mud, there would be no bread, no beer, no civilization. It's funny how easily we forget that civilization begins with dirt. Further along the field, a small group gathers around what looks like a pile of grain covered by woven mats. They're threshing, separating grain from chaff. A pair of donkeys walk in circles over the stalks, hooves pounding steadily, while children sweep the loosened husks away with palm fronds. Dust swirls around them, catching in their hair, glinting in the light. You sneeze, earning a few amused looks. Even 3,000 years ago, hay fever was undefeated. A young man lifts a winnowing basket and tosses the mixture into the air. The breeze catches it, carrying away the lighter husks and leaving the heavier kernels to fall back. It's mesmerizing, like watching golden snow drift upward. He repeats the motion over and over until the kernels gleam clean and ready. You think about how every grain here is the product of hundreds of human hands and thousands of small, deliberate choices. The world's first cities, Uruk, Lagash, all began because people could store grain. It was the one resource that didn't spoil quickly, that could be measured, traded, and taxed. Barley wasn't just food, it was data, accounting, stability. You might even say bread is the original spreadsheet. By midday, the sun sits like molten brass above the horizon. You retreat toward a patch of shade beside a mud brick wall, where a few farmers have gathered for their break. Someone passes you a water skin, and you drink deeply. It's lukewarm, slightly brackish, but refreshing nonetheless. Another farmer pulls a small bundle from a cloth, flatbread, folded neatly with a smear of something dark inside. You recognize it, mashed dates, the world's earliest energy bar. You bite into one when offered. The bread is coarse, dry, but softens in your mouth as the sweetness of the dates melts through. A simple recipe, yet somehow perfect for this world. Fuel made from what the earth freely offers. The farmers talk among themselves, laughing occasionally. You can't follow the words, but you understand the tone. It's the same easy camaraderie found in lunch breaks everywhere, from skyscraper offices to suburban cafes. The tools change, but people don't. You glance back toward the fields. A woman is carrying a clay jar on her shoulder, walking along the ridge between two irrigation ditches. The jar tilts slightly as she walks, the motion graceful, practiced. It reminds you of how much precision daily life here required. Every movement, planting, harvesting, carrying, was calibrated for survival. Historians still argue whether the rise of farming is a blessing or a trap. Some say it gave humans stability, allowing art, writing, and architecture to flourish. Others claim it bound us to labor, disease, and social hierarchy. But standing here, under this relentless sun, it's hard to separate those outcomes. The Mesopotamians didn't have the luxury of philosophical hindsight, they just needed to eat. As the day fades, you make your way back toward the village. The fields are quiet now, dotted with resting workers and grazing animals. You can still hear the low murmur of the river in the distance, its surface reflecting orange light like molten copper. The same river that feeds these crops will soon flood again, washing away boundaries and beginning the cycle anew. You stop for a moment, looking back over the land. The barley fields ripple gently in the evening breeze, and for the briefest second, it feels like they're breathing. Each stalk carries the story of thousands of years, of human patience, ingenuity, and maybe a touch of stubbornness. When you brush your fingers against the grain, it whispers a kind of memory. You can almost hear the first farmers realizing what they'd done, turning wild nature into something domestic, repeatable, dependable. They didn't invent bread overnight, they built it, one seed at a time. And tomorrow, when you wake to grind the barley and mix it into dough, you'll remember that all of civilization, its temples, its kings, even its gods, stands on these tiny grains. Without them, there would be no story to tell tonight, and certainly no breakfast waiting in the morning. You head home, following the fading trail of smoke rising from the village ovens. The air smells faintly of charred crust and cooling clay. Somewhere, a child laughs. Somewhere else, a dog barks at a goat that's refusing to go inside. And as the first stars blink awake over the land between rivers, you realize that what began here, in the crunch of soil beneath your feet and the weight of grain in your hands, is still with you, in every loaf you've ever eaten. The next morning arrives with the quiet insistence of another long day. The light slips over the clay rooftops, soft and pale, and you wake to the muffled sounds of movement, farmers heading to the fields before the sun becomes unbearable. The smell of wet soil drifts in through your window. Somewhere nearby, someone is already calling to their oxen in the sing-song tone of routine. You stretch, rub your eyes, and decide to follow the river again. The Tigris glimmers faintly as it winds between the fields. Even now, before the sun has fully climbed, the water carries hints of heat, as if it remembers the day ahead. The air buzzes with small insects, frogs croak from the shallows, and reeds whisper in the breeze. You crouch to watch the current tug at clumps of silt, the same fertile mud that will soon turn into bread. Civilization, it seems, is built on sludge. Today, you're walking the path of the Mesopotamian farmer, the unsung inventor behind every loaf ever baked. You'll see how floods, tools, and teamwork turned unpredictable nature into steady nourishment. And along the way, you'll probably get a bit muddy, so, watch your sandals. The first field you reach belongs to a family who's already at work. A man drives 2 oxen yoked together, the wooden plow behind them cutting through the damp soil in uneven lines. You hear the low creak of the wood, the wet slap of hooves, the man's quiet muttering, half effort, half prayer. Farming here isn't just work, it's an agreement between human and earth. Break your side of it, and the gods might take it personally. You fall into step beside him for a while, watching the plow turn the soil. It's not deep, but it's enough to loosen the ground and prepare it for seeds. The scent that rises is thick and metallic, raw earth mixed with something faintly sweet. You can feel the humidity settle on your skin like a thin glaze of clay. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian farmers invented the plow themselves or borrowed the idea from earlier peoples near the Zagros foothills. What's certain is that this simple tool changed everything. Before it, planting meant scratching holes with sticks and hoping for the best. After it, humans could manage larger plots, growing enough surplus grain to feed cities, priests, soldiers, and scribes, people who didn't have to farm at all. So, in a roundabout way, every ancient accountant owes their job to a sweaty farmer and 2 grumpy oxen. You pass a group of workers patching an irrigation canal. The water has overflown during last week's flood, cutting through the embankment like a knife. The men scoop mud into baskets, carry it up the slope, and stomp it down with their bare feet. The rhythm is oddly satisfying. A wet slap, a grunt, and a squelch. You stand watching for a while, and one of them gestures for you to join in. You hesitate, then step forward. The mud is shockingly cool against your feet, squishing between your toes. You help press down the patch, and the worker laughs approvingly, saying something you don't understand, but that probably translates to, "You'll need a new pair of sandals after this." The Mesopotamians understood water like no one else. They had to. The Tigris and Euphrates gave life, but also destruction, flooding unpredictably, shifting course, sometimes vanishing altogether in dry years. So they built vast networks of canals, ditches, and levees, all dug and maintained by hand. Some scholars think managing those systems required so much coordination that it pushed people to invent writing itself. After all, when you have to track who dug what ditch and who owes how much grain for it, memory stops being enough. You trail your hand in the moving water, watching the silt swirl in lazy eddies. The farmers nearby are spreading the first layer of manure across the fields, a fragrant experience, to put it kindly. The smell is thick, earthy, and immediate. It clings to the air like gossip. You wrinkle your nose, earning a few amused glances. You guess some things never change. Someone always finds the smell of productivity unbearable. Later, the day grows hotter. The workers take refuge under a makeshift awning woven from reeds. Someone passes around a clay jug of water. Another offers a small pouch of dried figs. You join them, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, brushing off your hands. The oldest farmer begins telling a story in slow, rhythmic Sumerian, his voice deep and soothing like a drum. You catch a few words you recognize: river, gods, barley. The younger ones chuckle and translate for you with gestures. The story is about Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water, who once dug the first canal with his bare hands so humans could grow crops. But in typical divine fashion, he accidentally flooded half the land before figuring out how to direct the water properly. The moral, apparently, is that even gods need practice. It's a good reminder that agriculture wasn't born perfect. Every new idea, every canal, every plow was an experiment. Sometimes it worked beautifully. Sometimes it ended with mud in your kitchen. You smile, chewing on a fig that's both chewy and oddly savory from the dust that sticks to everything here. Civilization tastes like sweat, salt, and fruit left too long in the sun. After the rest, you follow another farmer down a narrow path toward the fields near the village's edge. The crops here are younger, short green shoots poking through damp soil. He kneels, checking the depth of the water pooled between rows. The sun reflects off it, almost blinding, and the surface wriggles with tiny insects. He gestures for you to listen. Beneath the hum of heat and wind, there's a faint burble, the sound of flowing life. He explains, through a mix of gestures and simple words, that too much water will drown the plants, too little will dry them out. The canals are opened and closed using small clay plugs, adjusted by feel more than measurement. It's an intuitive science passed down through generations, and watching him, you realize it's a kind of artistry too. He might not call himself a scientist, but he knows the sky, soil, and seasons better than anyone holding a degree thousands of years later. Historians still argue whether these irrigation systems were managed communally or controlled by temple administrators. Either way, it was cooperation, or maybe shared desperation, that kept the canals flowing. Without them, there'd be famine. And without grain, there'd be no bread, no beer, no civilization to boast about. You imagine what it must feel like at harvest, when the fields turn gold and the whole community gathers to cut, thresh, and store the year's labor. You've seen the grain bins, those massive clay silos sealed with reed mats and plaster. Inside, they hold the promise of winter survival and the seeds for next spring. If bread is life, then these are its beating hearts. As afternoon drifts toward evening, the temperature finally begins to soften. The oxen are led home, snorting clouds of dust, and the farmers collect their tools. You walk back along the canal, your feet leaving prints in the damp earth. The light turns everything bronze: water, soil, even your skin. A child runs past you holding a bundle of green barley shoots. He's laughing, shouting something about dinner, and you realize the same grain you watched sprouting this morning will soon find its way to a grinding stone, a clay bowl, and an oven's wall. It's all one seamless circle: field to fire to feast. When you reach the village, the ovens are already glowing. The smell of baking bread floats through the twilight, rich and smoky. The people here don't need alarm clocks or calendars. They live by scent and season. You pause beside one of the ovens, watching a baker slap a flattened round of dough onto the hot inner wall. It sticks instantly, puffing slightly as heat licks its surface. You remember the mud on your feet, the farmer's tired hands, the slow patience of the canals. Every step you took today is somehow baked into that bread. Every drop of sweat, every prayer to Enki, every scoop of river silt. Civilization doesn't rise from marble halls or golden crowns. It rises from muddy footprints that dry beside an oven's glow. You take a deep breath, the smell filling your lungs, and smile. Tomorrow, you'll learn what comes next, how all that hard-earned grain is ground, sifted, and shaped into something worthy of gods and workers alike. But for now, the world feels perfectly full. The river hums softly in the distance, the ovens crackle, and the stars begin their quiet climb above the land that never stops feeding itself. The next day begins with the low, rhythmic thud of grinding stones. Before the sun climbs too high, before the air becomes thick and unkind, the village stirs awake to one of the oldest sounds in human history. You follow it through the alleys, past mud walls painted with white ash and straw, until you find the source, a small courtyard where 3 women are already at work, each kneeling before a flat slab of basalt. Their arms move in steady arcs, pushing a heavy upper stone back and forth over handfuls of barley. The sound is dry, gritty, and eternal. You settle down nearby, careful not to disturb the pattern. Dust rises from the stones in fine clouds that glitter in the morning light. The air smells like raw grain, earthy and faintly sweet, the scent of both life and labor. The women don't talk much. They hum occasionally, small melodies to mark the rhythm. One has a strip of linen tied around her forehead to catch the sweat. Another pauses now and then to stretch her back, muttering something under her breath that's definitely not a prayer. You try to imagine how many mornings like this have come before. The earliest grinding stones date back more than 10,000 years, long before writing, before kings, before anyone thought to measure time. Every day, across villages like this one, millions of arms turned grain into flour by sheer persistence. You glance at the nearest woman's hands, calloused, dusted white, the skin rough from years of stone and grain. There's a quiet nobility to it, the kind that doesn't need to be written in any record. You lean closer to see the process. The lower stone, called a saddle quern, is slightly concave from decades of wear. The upper stone fits perfectly into the groove, sliding forward and back. Each pass crushes the barley into coarse meal. The sound it makes, soft scraping layered over a low hum, is strangely hypnotic. You could almost fall asleep to it, like a primitive lullaby powered by endurance. A little boy toddles over carrying a clay bowl of unground grain. He tips it carefully onto the quern, spilling a bit, and laughs when one of the women scolds him half-heartedly. He's learning the first lessons of civilization: balance, patience, and the unspoken rule that every bit of grain counts. You pick up a kernel from the ground and bite it. It's hard, nutty, and slightly bitter. Definitely not a snack for the impatient. It reminds you how miraculous bread really is, how much effort stands between this tiny seed and a soft, steaming loaf. Historians still argue whether most of this grinding was done at home or in communal mills run by temples. The evidence leans both ways. Some houses had small grinding areas built right into the floor, while larger estates employed teams of women to process grain for distribution. Either way, the job was considered so essential that ancient texts even mention it as part of wages and rations. The phrase, "she ground her share," meant not just work, but contribution, an acknowledgement of one's role in feeding the city. You move closer to one of the women, an older baker with a sharp gaze softened by years of repetition. She gestures for you to try. You hesitate, then kneel, taking hold of the heavy upper stone. It's rough beneath your palms, gritty and slightly warm from use. You push it forward, awkwardly at first, and immediately realize how heavy it is. You pull it back, feeling your shoulders protest. She chuckles, adjusts your grip, and nods for you to continue. The motion becomes smoother after a few tries. Push, pull, breathe. Push, pull, breathe. Dust rises into the sunlight, coating your arms. Your muscles start to burn, but there's something deeply grounding about it. No pun intended. It's work that doesn't pretend to be anything else. You can see, hear, and smell your progress. The coarse meal gathers at the stone's edge like a pale dune. When you pause to catch your breath, the woman reaches into a small pouch and sprinkles something over the grain, a pinch of salt, and maybe a few crushed seeds of coriander. She grins, as if sharing a small secret. "Better smell," she says simply, in an accent so thick it almost sounds like song. You nod in agreement. Even in ancient times, flavor mattered. By midday, the courtyard is a haze of flour dust and sunlight. The women have gathered enough meal for several loaves. They sift it through woven reed baskets to remove larger husks, though plenty remain. The flour that falls through is coarse and uneven, but it will do. You run your fingers through it. It's dry, cool, and surprisingly soft, despite its roughness. One of the younger women starts packing the flour into a large clay jar. She does it with practiced care, tamping it down with the back of her hand. Every household in the village stores flour this way, sealed against moisture and pests with a thin lid of clay. It's both pantry and savings account. Lose your flour and you lose your security. You notice that nearby, in another yard, a man is hammering away at a new grinding stone. He uses a harder rock, dolerite, to carve the smooth surface. Chips of stone scatter around his feet. It takes him days to make one. You realize that even the tools of daily life have their own quiet craftsmanship. The entire city, in a sense, revolves around these simple circles of stone. As you rest in the shade, wiping sweat from your brow, you think about how grinding grain shaped society in ways no one could have predicted. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was constant, reliable. And maybe that's why bread became sacred. When you spend hours turning grain into powder, you start to see it not just as food, but as a transformation, an alchemy of effort. Historians still argue whether these early grinders were the first industrial workers in history. The rhythm of the quern, after all, was humanity's first machine. You start to hear it that way now, the steady scrape of labor, turning nature into nourishment. There's something soothing about it, even in its monotony. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound multiplied 1,000 times over, echoing across villages, temples, and cities. The heartbeat of civilization wasn't war drums or bronze forges, it was this low, persistent grinding. Later, as the sun dips low, the work slows. The women clean their tools with bits of straw, scraping away stuck flour. They stretch their backs, laugh softly, and start discussing who will bake tonight's batch. One mentions a temple order, 50 loaves for an offering. Another groans, joking that the gods must have very large appetites. You help carry a basket of freshly ground flour toward the communal oven. The weight surprises you. It's denser than you expect. You pass through the village streets where children chase each other with palm fronds and old men sit in the shade of reed mats, fanning themselves with scraps of parchment. The smell of smoke drifts faintly from the direction of the ovens, sweet, dry, and irresistible. You realize that this entire society moves in sync with bread making. The farmers sow it, the grinders shape it, the bakers bless it, and the priests record it. Every role connects through this single, simple act of eating. Civilization might look like walls and temples, but its foundation is flour dust and calloused hands. When you finally reach the ovens, you set down the basket and watch as the baker greets you with a grin. He looks at the flour, pinches a bit between his fingers, and nods approvingly. "Good grind," he says. You feel absurdly proud, as if you've passed some ancient test. He gestures toward a clay bench. "Tomorrow," he adds, "you mix." You laugh softly. "Tomorrow, then, another step closer to the perfect loaf." The courtyard behind you quiets as the grinding stones stop one by one. The sun sinks low, turning the dust in the air into glowing amber. You brush the last bit of flour from your arms and realize it's impossible to be truly clean here.
Every breath, every motion, every thought is tied to the work of turning grain into sustenance. The hum of evening rises, distant chatter, the crackle of ovens, the sigh of cooling air. You take a deep breath, savoring the smell of smoke and flour mingling. It's heavy but comforting, like a promise that tomorrow will sound exactly the same. You smile to yourself, thinking, maybe history isn't built by kings after all. Maybe it's built by tired hands and the steady whisper of stone on stone. The next morning, you wake to the soft glow of dawn brushing against the mud brick walls. Outside, the air is cooler than usual, and the scent of damp earth lingers after a light night breeze. Somewhere nearby, a rooster lets out an unenthusiastic crow, as if even it knows that today's pace will be slow and steady. You rise, stretch, and brush a fine dusting of flour from your clothes. It never truly leaves.
The baker you met yesterday waves you over to the mixing area. It's a shaded corner near the communal oven, sheltered by a reed canopy that flutters softly in the morning wind. The ground here is hard and smooth, darkened from years of spilled water and flour. In the middle sits a wide clay trough, the mixing bowl, large enough to hold the day's batch. Around it are smaller jars filled with water, salt, and some mysterious pastes.
He hands you a jar of flour and gestures to pour. Not all, he warns, his accent curling around the words. You pour a little, maybe half. He nods approvingly, then dips a clay ladle into one of the water jars and pours it in a slow, deliberate stream. The flour darkens, the scent deepens, and soon your hands sink into the mixture, sticky and uncertain. The first thing you notice is how warm it feels, body temperature, almost alive. The water is from the canal, slightly mineral, carrying a faint scent of reeds. The texture shifts as you press and fold, soft lumps giving way to something smoother. The baker sprinkles salt between your fingers. Balance, he says simply. Always balance.
You work the dough for a while, rhythm matching your breath. It's strangely meditative. Fold, press, turn, repeat. The baker occasionally adds more flour, adjusting the texture with an intuition that only comes from years of doing this. You realize there are no measurements, no recipes written down anywhere. The recipe is in the fingers, not the mind.
Nearby, another woman is preparing something called bapir, a twice-baked barley bread used to brew beer. She breaks yesterday's loaves into chunks, soaks them in water, and leaves them under a cloth to ferment slightly. The air already smells faintly sour and yeasty. Historians still argue whether beer came first or bread did, and honestly, both sides make a fair point. You can't make one without the other when you share ingredients this closely. The baker chuckles when he sees your face scrunch at the smell. It's good, he insists. The gods like it. Apparently, the gods have a nose for fermentation.
He moves toward another jar, this one sealed with a waxy lid. When he breaks it open, the aroma hits you immediately, sharp, tangy, and unmistakably alive. This, he explains, is the starter, the ancient ancestor of modern sourdough. A bit of yesterday's dough saved and kept wet, bubbling faintly from wild yeast in the air. He scoops a lump with his hand and folds it into your mixture. So the bread remembers, he says. You like that, the idea of memory baked into dough. Each batch carries the ghost of the one before it, a living connection across countless mornings. You mix it in, watching the bubbles form as you knead. The dough becomes pliant, smoother now, stretching without tearing. After a while, your shoulders ache, and you pause to watch how others work. Each person has a slightly different rhythm. Some knead fast, using short bursts of pressure. Others move slow and deliberate, almost like they're massaging the earth itself. The sound of hands slapping dough blends with the low murmur of conversation and laughter. You notice a small clay tablet resting on a nearby table. It's inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, cuneiform, though still unfamiliar to your eyes. The baker catches your curiosity and shrugs. Temple order, he explains. They count how much flour, how many loaves. Bureaucracy, it seems, was born alongside bread. You can almost imagine the first accountant grumbling, stylus in hand. 4 loaves short again? Someone's been nibbling. The tablet lists ingredients and amounts, along with the name of the goddess Ninkasi, the Sumerian patron of brewing and baking. She's probably busy, you think, juggling divine inventory management and yeast supervision. Still, there's something comforting about knowing that even the gods keep ledgers. The dough is ready now. You lift a portion and hold it up to the light. It stretches without breaking. Good, the baker says. Now rest. He covers the dough with a damp linen cloth and leaves it to sit. There's no timer, no thermometer, just patience. The sun climbs higher and the courtyard grows warm. You sit back on your heels, wiping your hands on your tunic. The baker offers you a drink, barley water flavored with date syrup. It's cool, grainy, and faintly sweet, like a proto-smoothie invented by necessity. You take a slow sip and realize how deeply refreshing it is after kneading in the heat. You both sit in silence for a while, watching the dough rise. It's subtle at first, just a slow swelling, a shift in texture. But you can feel it, life working quietly under the surface. The baker says nothing, only nods occasionally, as if acknowledging an old friend. You think about how, in a world without clocks, this is how people measured time. By the behavior of dough, the shadow on a wall, the way air feels before noon. After about an hour, he uncovers the dough. It's puffier now, softer to the touch. He pinches off pieces and begins shaping them into small discs, flattening each with his palm. You join in, imitating his movements. The dough resists at first, then yields, springing slightly back each time. You feel a strange satisfaction in its texture, something between cloud and clay. He shows you a trick. Press your thumb gently into the center of each loaf so it doesn't balloon too much in the oven. You do it carefully, leaving perfect little craters in the center. That way, he says, it cooks even, no air pockets. Historians still argue whether these early bakers understood fermentation scientifically or simply by instinct. It doesn't matter, you decide. They had something better than data, experience. You can almost feel centuries of hands repeating these same gestures, guided by nothing more than sight, smell, and trust. One of the women nearby adds seeds to her loaves, sesame, maybe flax, and hums quietly as she works. The smell of the dough is incredible now, warm, nutty, faintly sour. It clings to the air, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. As the loaves rest again, you look around at the courtyard. Clay bowls are stacked neatly in one corner, along with bundles of straw used for cleaning the ovens. A cat lounges near the doorway, tail flicking lazily as it watches for crumbs. You wonder if even the animals here are connoisseurs of ancient carbs. The baker suddenly laughs, pointing toward a child who's trying to sneak a lump of dough into his mouth. Every day, he sighs. They never learn. He doesn't seem angry, just amused, as if this is a small ritual of mischief he secretly approves of. You suspect that even thousands of years from now, bakers everywhere will still have to guard their dough from impatient snackers. You glance at the resting dough again. It's grown slightly larger, small bubbles forming on the surface. The baker nods approvingly. Good yeast, he says. The air is right today. Apparently, the gods of humidity are on your side. While waiting for the final rise, he teaches you another trick. He pulls a piece of dough from the side and stretches it thin until you can almost see through it. See, he says, this means strong. The gluten, though he doesn't call it that, forms delicate threads like tiny webs holding everything together. It's mesmerizing, a microcosm of structure and resilience.
You imagine a future archaeologist trying to reconstruct this moment from ancient residue found on pottery shards. Evidence suggests a primitive gluten test, they might write. Or maybe they'll just say somebody really cared about their bread. The baker suddenly grins, breaking the silence. You probably won't survive this if you eat it raw, he jokes, echoing your first night's thought. You laugh, the sound bouncing softly off the walls. Then he gestures toward the large dome-shaped ovens nearby. The fire is already burning inside, glowing orange, filling the air with waves of heat. The next step, he says, is the real test. But for now, you both sit quietly, watching the dough breathe, alive and ancient. There's a calmness to it, a shared stillness between human and bread. In this moment, you're part of something far older than language, something that hums softly in the background of civilization, the rhythm of making food with your hands, guided by patience and heat. And when the baker finally stands, stretching his arms, he gives you a knowing look. Tomorrow, he says, we bake. You nod. You can almost taste the future warmth in the air. The next morning greets you with the faint crackle of fire and the smell of wood smoke curling lazily through the still air. The sun hasn't fully risen yet. The horizon glows faintly gold over the rooftops of mud and straw. You follow the scent toward the communal baking area, where the baker from yesterday is already at work, stoking the fire inside a large rounded clay structure. The oven, called a tanur, stands taller than your waist, shaped like an upside-down pot, its mouth open at the top. The fire roars within it, red and alive, licking the curved walls that radiate heat outward in shimmering waves. You can feel it from several paces away, a dry, intense warmth that seems to wrap around you and seep into your skin. Today, the baker says with a grin, you learn how to dance with fire. You raise an eyebrow at that, half expecting him to hand you a drum. Instead, he passes you a long paddle made of wood, blackened from use. No fear, he adds, only respect. You peer into the oven's mouth. The walls inside glow faintly orange, smooth and darkened with years of soot. The bottom is sprinkled with ashes and tiny pebbles. The smell is intoxicating. Char, earth, faintly sweet smoke. You realize this isn't just an oven. It's a vessel of transformation, part machine, part shrine. Before baking, the dough needs one last touch. You return to the shaded mixing area, where the loaves you shaped yesterday have risen under their linen cloths. They're plump now, soft as pillows, the air trapped within giving them a gentle spring. The baker uncovers them, nodding with satisfaction. They breathe well, he murmurs, pressing his thumb lightly against one loaf. The indentation stays for a moment before slowly puffing back. Perfect. He dusts the surface of each loaf with flour, the gesture quick and practiced. You copy him, leaving uneven streaks that make him chuckle. Not bad, he says. You'll look like a real baker soon, covered in flour and always hungry. You help him carry the loaves toward the oven, the smell of smoke growing stronger as you approach. The other bakers are already there, chatting quietly as they prepare their own batches. A few are shaping smaller, flatter breads, probably for temple offerings or for travelers who prefer something easy to carry. One woman sprinkles sesame seeds on top of her loaves. Another brushes hers with date syrup, giving them a sweet glaze. The baker explains that not all breads are equal. Some are made for the gods, dense, shaped with stamps of divine symbols. Others are for soldiers, practical and long-lasting. And some, like yours, are simply for the people, humble, nourishing, and gone by nightfall. Bread, he says, is a mirror. You can tell who someone is by the bread they eat. You crouch near the oven's base and peek through a small vent where the fire burns hottest. The baker adds a handful of chopped reeds and dried dung. The latter you try not to think about too hard. It flares up instantly, crackling with bright sparks.
Hot enough, he declares. Now watch. He takes a small round of dough, pats it flat between his palms, and with a practiced motion, slaps it directly against the inner wall of the oven. It sticks there, sizzling slightly at the edges. Within seconds, it puffs up, the surface bubbling and darkening in spots. The smell changes, smoky, nutty, faintly caramelized. You feel your stomach growl in response. He peels the finished bread off the wall with a hooked stick and hands it to you. It's blistered, uneven, and perfect. You tear off a piece, the crust crackling under your fingers. The inside is soft and warm, slightly chewy, with a hint of smoke. You close your eyes for a moment. It's simple, but divine. He grins. Now your turn. You hesitate, holding your small dough disc like a fragile artifact. The fire's heat feels intense on your face, making your eyes water. You mimic his movement, quick, confident slap, and stick the dough to the wall. It clings for about 2 seconds. Then it drops unceremoniously into the ashes. The baker bursts out laughing. "First one always feeds the fire," he says. "It's tradition." After a few more tries and sacrifices to the fire gods, you finally get one to stick. Watching it bake feels oddly suspenseful, like waiting for magic to happen. The edges curl slightly, the surface bubbles, and soon it's done. You use the hook to peel it off, triumphant. It's not perfect, but it's bread. Your bread. The baker nods approvingly. You see, fire teaches better than people. As the morning unfolds, the oven becomes the heart of the courtyard. People drift in and out, farmers, children, temple workers, all waiting for their share. Some bring small bundles of dough wrapped in leaves, others just watch, hypnotized by the glow. You notice how the oven's presence draws everyone together. It's not just about food, it's about warmth, community, ritual. Historians still argue whether these ancient ovens were run by individuals or shared communally. But standing here, it's hard to imagine them as anything other than shared spaces. The laughter, the smell of baking, the crackle of fire, it feels like the pulse of a neighborhood. The baker tells you stories as you work, about times when the ovens broke during floods, or when people lined up through the night before festival days, bringing offerings for the gods. He even mentions a strange old tale about a baker who swore he could taste omens in the crust of each loaf. He said the gods send messages through bubbles, the baker chuckles. He was either blessed or hungry. You laugh, brushing flour from your arms. It sticks to your sweat, forming pale streaks. You can't help but think how little has changed. Even in modern bakeries, there's that same rhythm: flour, fire, laughter, and exhaustion. The air grows hotter as the sun climbs. The courtyard shimmers in the heat, and the ovens glow brighter, reflecting light off their rounded tops. Someone brings a basket of herbs, thyme, coriander, and dried onion flakes, and begins rubbing them onto fresh dough. The scent that rises is heavenly, spicy and green, cutting through the smoke. You feel yourself drifting, lulled by the repetition of it all. As noon approaches, the final loaves are baking. The baker opens a clay jar and pulls out a small, round, honey-colored disc. "Special bread," he says, "for the priests." He breaks it in half and shows you the inside. It's filled with crushed dates and nuts. The smell alone could make you believe in divine indulgence. He offers you a piece. It's soft, sweet, and rich, almost cake-like. You can see why it's reserved for temple rituals. He explains that bread offerings were often left overnight for the gods, though, mysteriously, they always seem to disappear by morning. You raise an eyebrow. He winks. Gods get hungry too, especially temple guards. You both laugh quietly, but there's something beautiful in the thought. Even if the gods didn't eat, people still believed the gesture mattered. Bread wasn't just food, it was communication, a bridge between the divine and the daily. By the time the fire dies down, your body feels heavy and slow. The courtyard smells like heaven, warm dough, smoke, and faint sweetness. You help stack the cooling loaves on woven trays, each one slightly different in shape and color. The baker looks over the day's work and nods with satisfaction. "Good fire," he says. "It listened today." You sit together under the shade of a fig tree, sharing a loaf still warm from the oven. The crust crackles as you tear it open. The inside steams gently, soft and fragrant. You dip a piece into olive oil mixed with crushed garlic and coriander, and for a moment, the whole world seems to narrow to that single taste. Simple, ancient, perfect. The baker leans back with a sigh. "You see," he murmurs, "the fire, the flour, the hands, they all remember." You nod, watching the smoke rise in lazy spirals toward the pale sky. The city hums in the distance, donkey carts, children's laughter, the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer. But here, everything feels still, timeless. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent one last time, realizing that this moment, sitting in the warmth of a dying oven, sharing bread with a stranger, might be as close to understanding ancient life as you'll ever get. You smile faintly, crumbs on your lips. Maybe this is what civilization really tastes like. By now, the rhythm of the city has woven itself into your bones. The hum of trade, the murmur of gossip, the crackle of ovens in the courtyards. You've begun to recognize the smells that mark each part of the day. Damp earth and barley husks in the morning, warm dough and smoke at midday, and in the evening, the faint tang of cooling clay and cooked grain. Today, though, the baker greets you with a new task. "No grinding, no mixing, no baking," he says with a smirk. "Today, you trade." You blink, unsure if he's joking. Trade what? He gestures toward a wicker basket stacked high with loaves, still warm from the oven. Bread doesn't stay fresh forever. We trade before it sleeps. So you follow him out of the courtyard and into the beating heart of the marketplace. The street opens like a riverbed, flowing with movement. Clay jars clink, goats bleat, and merchants shout prices that no one seems to agree on. The air is thick with the smell of oil, dates, sweat, and dust. It's mesmerizing in a slightly overwhelming way. Every step feels alive, each stall a story, each face a thread in this great human tapestry. You can almost feel civilization itself breathing here. You and the baker set up a small table near the edge of the main square, shaded by a patched cloth. He arranges the loaves neatly, brushing a bit of flour off their surfaces. Within minutes, the first customers arrive. A woman carrying a jug of milk barters for 2 loaves. A fisherman offers dried river fish in exchange for 1. There's no currency changing hands, just an endless chain of barter, favor, and trust. The baker seems to know everyone. He jokes easily, calls out greetings, slips an extra piece of bread to an old man who's clearly short on goods. You realize that in this city, reputation is worth more than silver. Historians still argue whether early Mesopotamians used bread itself as a form of currency. The records show payments listed in loaves, workers receiving 10 breads per day instead of coins. Standing here, watching bread move like water from hand to hand, you can believe it. Each loaf is a measure of labor, a symbol of survival. A man approaches carrying a small clay jar sealed with wax. He sets it down carefully. "Oil," he says, "from the priest's gardens." The baker examines the seal and nods approvingly, then hands over 3 loaves. When the man leaves, you unseal the jar and take a cautious sniff. The scent is rich and green, faintly bitter, the good kind of oil. "See," the baker says, "everyone needs bread, even priests." You grin, realizing that bread is the great equalizer. Whether you're a scribe, a fisherman, or a servant of the gods, you still need to eat. You picture the temple kitchens, huge ovens smoking day and night, feeding the divine staff. Somewhere, a priest is probably enjoying a loaf just like yours, paired with oil traded from this very basket. As the morning deepens, the market grows louder. Traders from distant towns arrive with donkeys laden with goods, copper, lapis, spices, and, oddly enough, salted frogs. You're not sure who's buying those, but the baker winks. Everything sells if you call it sacred. You laugh softly, remembering yesterday's divine honey bread. Maybe that's true of all civilizations. The sacred and the practical always tangled together like dough and yeast. Between customers, you wander a little, curious about the stalls. You pass a scribe hunched over a low table, selling small clay tablets etched with cuneiform lessons. A woman selling perfume invites you to smell a jar of myrrh oil. It's so strong it makes your nose sting. Nearby, a potter's wheel spins slowly as he shapes a jar, his hands sure and steady, clay whispering between his fingers. The baker joins you and points toward a group of men kneeling by a large scale. They're weighing bags of grain, their movements precise and ceremonial. That's how the temples pay workers, he explains. Grain for labor, flour for skill, bread for loyalty. You think about that hierarchy. The field laborers bent under the sun, the grinders turning stones, the bakers sweating beside the ovens. Each step transforms grain a little further, each hand adding value until the final loaf emerges, a symbol of both sustenance and structure. Historians still argue whether this was the first form of a wage economy or merely a redistribution system. Either way, you're standing in the birthplace of economic order, and it smells faintly of baked barley. By midday, the market reaches its noisy crescendo. The air trembles with the heat rising from the stones. Somewhere, a flute player competes bravely with the shouting of merchants. You sip barley water from a clay cup and watch as children chase each other around the stalls, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic ring of hammers from the metalworkers' quarter. The baker returns from a short walk, grinning. "Good trade," he says, shaking a small pouch. Inside are dates, salt, and even a tiny piece of copper wire. "For tools," he explains. "Tomorrow we fix the paddle." You can't help but admire the simplicity of it all. No ledgers, no coins, just exchange built on trust, community, and a shared understanding of what things are worth. You wonder how long this balance can last before someone decides to invent money. Probably not too long, if you know human nature. He catches you smirking. "What?" "Just imagining," you say. "One day, people will pay for bread with little pieces of metal." He squints. "Why metal?" You shrug. "Because it's shiny." He laughs so hard he nearly drops the pouch. "Then I'll make bread that shines, and I'll be rich." As the afternoon stretches on, a caravan from the north arrives, traders from a distant city along the Tigris. Their dialect is rougher, their clothes dusted in sand. They bring rare goods, honey, dried figs, and small clay pots of a strange white powder. You watch as they pour some into the baker's hand. He sniffs it, tastes it, then grins. "Salt," he says, "real salt." Salt, it turns out, is one of the few things even bread cannot live without. He trades a dozen loaves for a small pouch, treating it like treasure. You taste a pinch. It's sharp, clean, and instantly addictive. It makes everything else seem flat by comparison. Historians still debate whether ancient salt came from trade routes or evaporation pits, but either way, it was precious enough to shape alliances and wars. You suddenly understand why the baker looked so pleased. Bread and salt, together, are more than food. They're a bond, a promise of peace and hospitality. He wraps the pouch carefully and tucks it into his satchel. Tonight, he says, we feast. By late afternoon, the market begins to wind down. The sun turns the buildings amber, long shadows stretching over the stones. The crowd thins, leaving behind the soft rustle of closing stalls. You and the baker pack up what remains, only a few loaves left, flattened slightly from the day's handling. On the way back, you pass the riverbank. The water reflects the sky like molten copper. A group of children toss flat stones across the surface, counting skips. Women wash clothes nearby, slapping wet fabric against stones in rhythmic bursts. The scent of bread follows you, mingling with river wind and silt. The baker stops for a moment, watching the ripples spread across the water. You know, he says quietly, we feed half the city, but the city feeds us too. You nod. Balance. He smiles faintly. Always balance. Back at the courtyard, you set the remaining loaves on a low table. The others gather around, tired but cheerful. Someone brings a bowl of olives. Someone else pours oil into small clay cups. The baker tears a loaf in half and hands you a piece. The crust cracks under your fingers, still faintly warm. You dip it into the oil, take a bite, and feel the salt hit your tongue. Clean, bright, grounding. Around you, laughter rises, soft and content. The city beyond the walls hums like a distant tide, and the fire from the oven glows gently in the fading light. You think back to the market, the chaos, the barter, the noise, and realize that all of it flows back here, into this quiet space where everything ends in bread. It's not just food, it's the closing of a circle. You lean back, full and drowsy, and glance toward the glowing ovens. Tomorrow, you ask? The baker grins. Tomorrow, he says, we go to the temple. You raise an eyebrow. To pray? He laughs softly. To deliver bread to the gods. Let's hope they're hungry. The stars begin to appear above, faint and scattered like grains of salt. You watch them twinkle as the last of the fire dies down, thinking about how far bread travels, through hands, across tables, even up toward heaven. The morning begins with a dull, rhythmic sound, a kind of living heartbeat. Thud, pause, thud. Somewhere beyond the clay walls, heavy stones are being moved. The air itself seems to pulse with labor. The baker is already awake, his movements practiced and quiet. He's wrapping bundles of flatbread in woven reed mats, tying them with thin strips of date palm fiber. Each bundle holds 10 loaves, simple, round, barely thicker than your hand. Today, he says, we deliver to the ziggurat. You've seen the ziggurat from afar, a massive stepped pyramid rising above the rooftops of the city like a staircase built for gods. But up close, it dominates everything. Its shadow swallowing entire streets, its base teeming with life. Workers swarm over the lower terraces like ants, carrying bricks, hauling baskets of clay, shouting orders. The baker hefts a basket of bread and nods toward a shaded tent at the base of the structure. That's the ration point. The temple feeds the builders. Bread and beer, it keeps them moving. You follow him through the crowd, the dust thick enough to taste. The workers' faces are streaked with sweat and clay, their skin browned by the relentless sun. They move in rhythm, bound by necessity and repetition. Every block, every bucket, every shout, part of the same ancient machine. Inside the tent, a scribe sits at a low table with a stack of damp clay tablets. Each one is marked with rows of wedge-shaped impressions, rations, measurements, names. The baker greets him with a polite nod and sets down the baskets. Bread for the workers of Enlil's terrace, he says. The scribe, A thin man with a stylus tucked behind his ear looks up briefly and scratches a note into one of the tablets. 40 loaves received, he mutters, from the West Oven House. Approved. He presses his seal into the clay, an intricate symbol of authority, and waves you through. That's it. No coin, no counting, no argument. Just trust in clay. You follow the ration line outside. A group of workers has gathered, their hands outstretched. The baker opens a basket and begins handing out loaves one by one. Each man takes his share with a quiet nod. No conversation, just weary gratitude. You notice how each loaf looks the same, small, dense, slightly scorched on one side. Food designed not for taste, but endurance. A builder bites into his ration immediately, chewing slowly, eyes half closed. Another dips his bread into a wooden bowl of beer, thick, cloudy, and sour, and swallows with a sigh. That beer, you remember, was as much sustenance as the bread itself. In Mesopotamia, it wasn't just a drink, it was liquid bread. The brewing process transformed leftover grain into something nourishing, safe, and long-lasting. A typical worker's daily rations might include 3 to 4 liters of it. So, as you watch them drink and chew, you realize this is the foundation of civilization itself. Not marble, not bronze, but the quiet partnership between bread and beer. The energy of empires was born here in sweat and grain. You wander a bit farther, drawn by the sounds of labor. Men haul bricks made of mud and straw, still damp from their molds. The bricks leave streaks of brown on their skin. Overseers shout from wooden scaffolds, their voices cutting through the roar of effort. Somewhere, a drum beats to keep rhythm, steady, unrelenting. The baker stays behind, helping a few temple servants distribute more loaves. You find yourself near a small shaded area where some of the workers are resting. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a rag tied around his head, gestures for you to sit. You do. He offers a piece of his bread, breaking it with rough fingers. "Hard work," he says, in a language thick with the local accent. "Hard bread." You smile, tearing off a piece. It's chewy, earthy, a little smoky. "Do you eat this every day?" you ask. He shrugs. "Bread, beer, sometimes dates, if the temple is generous." You glance at the towering ziggurat above, then back at the bread in your hands. "Do you ever wish for something different?" He laughs, a deep, honest sound. "Different? Maybe. But if I eat, and my children eat, then the gods can have their ziggurat." His words linger. There's no bitterness, just acceptance. Survival here isn't about luxury. It's about rhythm, routine, and the quiet promise that tomorrow's loaf will come. A young boy, barely more than a teenager, runs past carrying a small jar of beer for the overseer. He trips slightly on a loose stone, but catches himself. The jar wobbles, but doesn't spill. The older workers laugh. "Careful, boy," one of them calls out. "The gods will thirst if you fall." The boy grins and hurries on. You can't help but admire them, the builders, the bakers, the brewers, all linked by invisible threads of necessity. Every loaf baked in the city ends up here, transformed into energy, into muscle, into monuments. You think of the clay tablets you saw, the scribe recording rations day after day. Centuries later, archaeologists will find those very tablets, still legible, still crisp. They'll marvel at how early humanity measured its worth not in gold, but in bread. By midday, the heat is unbearable. The air wavers like a mirage. The workers take shelter under makeshift awnings, their bodies glistening with sweat. Someone passes around a jug of beer, and the baker joins them, handing out the last of the loaves. A soft breeze carries the smell of grain and clay, a strangely comforting scent. You watch as a few workers crumble leftover bread into the sand for the birds. It feels symbolic somehow, this small act of sharing in a world built on scarcity. The baker sits beside you, chewing thoughtfully. Every brick they lay, every stone they lift, it's because of this, he says, holding up his bread. The temple feeds them, the temple works them, and the gods, he gestures vaguely upward, the gods get the credit. You nod. And you? He grins. I get to make tomorrow's bread. The afternoon drifts by in a haze of dust and sunlight. A priest in white linen walks among the workers, blessing them in the name of Enlil, the god of wind and earth. His presence is quiet, solemn, but the men barely look up. Faith here is practical, woven into the rhythm of sweat and hunger. When the day finally cools, the workers begin to disperse. Some head to the river to wash. Others sit in small circles, sharing what's left of their rations. The ziggurat glows gold in the setting sun, its shadow stretching across the city like a sleeping giant. You follow the baker back toward the temple, your sandals caked with clay. The streets are quieter now, the air cooler. The baker stops to buy a handful of dates from a passing vendor, sweetness to break the monotony of salt and grain. He offers you one. It tastes like sunlight. As you walk, you think about how this system, grain, labor, worship, forms a delicate balance. Bread fuels the workers who build temples to the gods, who, in turn, bless the grain that becomes bread again. A perfect circle. In that sense, every loaf is both sacred and practical. It feeds bodies and sustains faith. The workers may never read the inscriptions carved into the ziggurat walls, but their fingerprints, literal and metaphorical, are baked into every brick. That realization fills you with a quiet awe. Civilization, you think, doesn't rise from brilliance alone. It rises from repetition, the simple act of waking, working, eating, resting, and doing it all again. You glance at the baker. He hums softly as he walks, hands dusted with flour, eyes half-tired but content. Maybe that's the secret of endurance, finding peace in the ordinary. When you return to the courtyard, night has fallen. The oven glows faintly, radiating the day's last warmth. The baker sits beside it, rubbing his hands near the coals. Tomorrow, he murmurs, the same again. More bread, more bricks, more blessings. You lie back on the cool clay floor and look up at the sky. The stars shimmer above the city, silent witnesses to the endless dance of labor and faith below. Somewhere in the half-light, you can still hear the faint sound of the workers singing, a slow, rhythmic chant that seems to rise and fall with the beating of the earth. You close your eyes, feeling the day's dust settle over you, and think, this is how history truly began, not with kings or wars, but with bread. Morning comes softer this time, the light breaking like honey across the rooftops. You wake to the gentle clang of metal on clay, someone nearby shaping molds for tomorrow's bread. The air smells faintly of smoke, river mud, and fermenting grain. A new day, another chance to chase that ancient perfection of flour, water, and fire. The baker greets you with a lazy wave. His hair sticks up in every direction, a halo of sleep and soot. Come, he says, today you learn about the temple loaves. You follow him through winding alleys until the narrow streets open into the temple district, a place of order, symmetry, and silence. The ziggurat looms behind it, massive as ever, but here the air feels strangely still. Priests move like white shadows between courtyards, their linen robes whispering against stone. You smell incense, resinous, spicy, almost sweet, and somewhere a bell chimes softly. The baker leads you to a side building that hums with activity.
Rows of ovens line the walls, and inside, temple workers knead and shape dough in near silence. These loaves aren't for the builders or common folk, they're for the gods. He gestures toward a low table covered in wooden molds, each carved with intricate symbols, stars, animals, sacred patterns. We bake offerings here, he explains quietly. Bread for Enlil, for Inanna, for the river god Ea. Different shapes for different prayers. You run a hand over one of the molds, tracing the delicate carvings. It's cool and smooth beneath your fingertips, worn by countless repetitions. Do the gods actually eat them? You ask, half joking. He grins, a small, tired smile. Historians still argue whether the gods ate the loaves or just smelled them, he says, echoing 1,000 years of speculation. But either way, they get first pick. You watch as one of the women kneads a special batch. The flour here is finer, the texture more uniform. She works in silence, her hands sure and precise. Every motion seems deliberate, almost ritualistic. When she's done, she divides the dough into perfect spheres and presses them into the molds. Each loaf bears a symbol before it bakes, a divine signature. You spot one with a crescent moon, another shaped like a bull's head, and one pressed with the cuneiform sign for abundance. They rest briefly on a reed tray, then slide into the oven where the fire glows low and steady. The smell is divine, literally in this case. Sweet, warm, faintly smoky, laced with the scent of oil and ash. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the aroma wash over you. If belief had a fragrance, this would be it. A priest enters, moving quietly between the bakers. He carries a bronze bowl filled with honey and oil. As the loaves finish baking, he brushes each one carefully, anointing them with shine. For favor, the baker murmurs beside you. Sweet things please the gods. You can't help but smile. Even divinity, it seems, appreciates good glazing. Later, the loaves are carried out in reed baskets to the temple altar. You follow the procession through a long courtyard lined with carved reliefs, rows of gods, priests, and worshippers frozen mid-offering. The morning sun cuts through the columns, painting the air with bands of gold and shadow. At the far end, an altar waits, stone, heavy, unadorned, except for a pair of small oil lamps flickering beside it. The air here feels thicker, quieter, as if even the dust hesitates to move. The priests arrange the loaves in neat rows. A second priest pours beer into small clay cups and sets them beside the bread. Another lights a bundle of dried herbs, and smoke curls lazily upward, carrying the scent of grain and resin skyward. For a moment, no one speaks. The scene is pure stillness. Then, softly, the high priest begins to chant. You don't understand the words, but the tone, the rise and fall, the cadence feels ancient and oddly comforting. Like the hum of grinding stones, it vibrates through the chest more than the ears. The baker leans toward you, whispering, "When the ceremony ends, the priests eat what's left. Some call it divine recycling." You stifle a laugh. Efficient gods. He nods. Practical gods. The ceremony continues, slow and deliberate. You watch the priest lift a loaf and break it in two, holding it toward the heavens. A few crumbs fall onto the stone, scattering like dust. For a fleeting moment, you imagine those crumbs as prayers, small, fragile, but persistent enough to feed eternity. You notice something else. One of the loaves isn't perfectly shaped. A small crack runs along its surface. The baker beside you winces slightly. "Not every offering is flawless," he murmurs. "Sometimes the gods accept imperfection. Sometimes they don't. You wonder what happens to the ones they reject." Later, you find out those loaves are fed to the temple goats. Divine leftovers, chewed into oblivion.
You can't decide whether that's tragic or comforting. After the ritual, the baker takes you around the back of the temple, where an apprentice is experimenting with a new recipe. He's mixing crushed dates into the dough, using a stone pestle and a small bowl of honeyed water. It makes the bread softer, the boy says shyly, and it lasts longer too. The baker chuckles. A clever idea. The gods might even prefer it.
You try a small piece of the cooled loaf and your eyebrows lift. It's actually delicious. Sweet, fragrant, with a chewy texture that feels almost modern. The boy grins proudly, brushing flour from his hands. Historians still debate whether sweetened loaves like this were eaten by the elite or offered to deities. But tasting it now, you think it must have been both. Some pleasures are too good to waste on the divine alone. As you sit beneath the shade of a date palm, watching the smoke drift up from the temple ovens, you can't help but reflect on how religion and food intertwine here. Bread isn't just sustenance, it's language. Every ingredient, every loaf, every ritual gesture says something to someone, whether mortal or god. The baker sits beside you, elbows on his knees. "You know," he says softly, "my father baked for the temple before me. His father too. They say our hands remember what our minds forget." You glance down at your own fingers, still dusted with flour. "Maybe that's true for all of us," you murmur. "Maybe memory lives in motion." He nods. "The gods may not eat our bread, but they eat our effort. That's enough." Afternoon light slants low through the courtyard. The priests have finished their duties, and the bakers begin cleaning their tools, scraping dough from bowls, sweeping ash from the ovens, washing their hands in cool river water. The smell of honeyed bread lingers like incense. You notice a small inscription carved into the stone near the doorway. It's a simple cuneiform phrase, worn nearly smooth. "For those who feed the gods will feed the earth." You trace the marks gently, feeling the shallow grooves beneath your fingertips. There's something profoundly circular about it, an echo of everything you've seen since you arrived. The grain grows from the soil, the bread rises from the grain, the offerings return to the soil again. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the temple fade into the background. The heat, the scent, the quiet weight of ritual, it all blurs together into something timeless. For the first time, you truly understand what the baker meant when he said his hands remember. Every motion, every loaf, every breath is a prayer written in flour. As evening falls, you help carry the empty baskets back to the bakery. The city glows amber in the dying light, and the air feels softer, almost forgiving. The baker stretches his back and smiles. "Tomorrow," he says, "we bake for the living again." You laugh quietly. "Do they get the same recipe?" He grins. "No, the gods get honey. The people get patience." You both laugh, the sound carrying lightly through the narrow street, mingling with the faint crackle of the ovens and the distant hum of temple bells. The scent of the sacred loaves still clings to your hands, a reminder that even in a world ruled by divine names and clay tablets, it's still the small human act of baking that keeps it all turning. The morning air carries a quiet anticipation. You step into the bakery courtyard to find the baker already tending the fire, his face glowing in the soft orange light. Today isn't about offerings or temple loaves, it's about sustaining the people. The city is awake now, its heartbeat in the rhythm of footsteps, carts clattering over cobblestones, and the faint calls of street vendors. The baker gestures to a clay jar of flour and a small sack of barley. "We make for the households today," he says. "Bread for the families, the children, the ones who can't fetch it themselves." You kneel beside the large mixing trough, dipping your fingers into the soft, powdery flour. The texture is familiar now,
comforting almost. You pour in water slowly, folding it into the mixture with deliberate, meditative motions. You can feel the dough beginning to come alive under your hands, sticky at first, then gradually forming a pliable, cohesive mass. The baker sprinkles in a pinch of salt and a small portion of starter dough, and you watch as bubbles form on the surface, tiny pockets of air that hint at life inside. The courtyard is quiet, except for the rhythmic sound of kneading. You press and fold, turn and press again, feeling the weight of your hands in the dough, the resistance and stretch of its texture. The baker watches, correcting your form gently, guiding your hands when necessary. "Patience," he murmurs. "The dough will tell you what it needs." Nearby, a woman rolls out small discs of dough for flatbreads, her movements practiced and fluid. She sprinkles them lightly with crushed herbs, a touch of coriander, a few sesame seeds, and presses them gently to ensure they stick. You lean closer, inhaling the subtle aroma. Historians still argue whether these additions were primarily for flavor or for ritual significance. Either way, the scent is irresistible, grounding you in the simple pleasure of preparing food. A young apprentice approaches with a basket of shaped loaves, their surfaces smooth and rounded, ready for the oven. The baker nods approvingly and gestures for you to follow him to the tanur. The fire inside glows steadily, the walls of the clay oven radiating heat in waves that you can feel from a distance. He wipes the soot from a long wooden paddle and demonstrates how to slide a loaf carefully against the inner wall. You watch as the bread clings, puffing slightly as it begins to bake, the edges darkening in a perfect, uneven pattern. When it's time for your turn, you mimic his motions, hands steady but slightly trembling from excitement. The first attempt slips, falling into the ashes below. The baker chuckles. "Every baker feeds the floor once," he says. You laugh, brushing yourself off and trying again. This time, the dough sticks. The edges bubble and the aroma fills the air, a warm, smoky, nutty scent that makes your stomach growl. Wiping flour from your hands and look around. The courtyard has become a hive of quiet activity. Children run past, carrying scraps of dough to animals. An elderly woman sweeps the ground, dust rising in pale clouds. A goat nudges the edge of a reed basket, sniffing for crumbs. The baker moves among everyone, distributing tasks and guiding hands with a gentle patience. He hands you a small loaf, still warm from the oven. You tear a piece, feeling the crust crack and give way to a soft, springy interior. You dip it into a bit of olive oil someone has brought and take a slow bite. It's simple, nourishing, and completely satisfying. The kind of food that feels like it should have existed forever. "You know," the baker says, leaning against the oven, "this is why we bake for the people. Not glory, not gods, just life itself." You nod, savoring the quiet wisdom of it. There's an intimacy in this act. Hands to dough, dough to fire, fire to bread, bread to mouth, that feels almost sacred in its simplicity. Throughout the morning, loaves are shaped, baked, and carried away. You watch as bundles are distributed to families in the surrounding streets. Women greet the baker with gratitude, children tug at his robe for an extra piece, and the elderly nod quietly, eyes soft. The baker seems to know everyone personally, as if the act of baking connects him to the entire community. One boy, no older than 10, tugs at your sleeve and points to a loaf. You break it in half and hand it over. His face lights up, a smile so bright it seems to make the dust sparkle. It's a small gesture, but the joy it creates feels monumental. You realize that in a city like this, bread isn't just food, it's currency, medicine, and a bridge between hearts. Historians still debate how widespread home baking versus communal baking was in Mesopotamia. Standing here, watching loaves leave the bakery for countless households, It seems likely that communal ovens played a vital role in feeding the populace. You think about the coordination required: fires stoked at the right temperature, dough prepared in advance, distribution organized without written schedules. It's a feat of logistics disguised as simple daily work. By midday, the sun is high and the courtyard radiates warmth. The baker wipes his brow with the back of his hand and gestures for a brief rest. You sit on a low bench, inhaling the faint smoke and earthy scent of the surrounding walls. A woman nearby rolls dough for flatbreads, humming softly. You notice that even amidst labor, there's music, rhythm, a heartbeat to the day. He hands you a small cup of barley water. You sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe your throat. Simple things, he says. Feed the body, feed the soul. You watch him work, his hands moving in practiced, effortless motions, kneading, shaping, sliding loaves into the oven. Each movement carries centuries of knowledge, a lineage of bakers passed down through generations. You try to imitate him, feeling the history in your fingers, in the pull and stretch of the dough, in the heat radiating from the oven. The afternoon is slow, punctuated by the occasional delivery of flour from the mills, or a call from a nearby household requesting a special batch. You notice the variation in dough textures: the coarser barley for workers' bread, the finer wheat for families, a mix of grains for those who can afford it. Each type of bread has its purpose, its audience, its place in the city's ecosystem. A small group gathers to watch, including a curious child and an elderly man who leans heavily on a cane. The baker offers them a piece of warm bread each. The child bites eagerly, the elderly man slowly, thoughtfully. Their reactions are different, yet equally meaningful. Food, you realize, bridges ages, statuses, and stories. As the day winds down, you help carry the remaining loaves to the edge of the city. The streets are quieter now, shadows long and golden. Families gather to receive their portion, thanking the baker and workers with nods, smiles, and a few words in passing. You notice the satisfaction in their faces, the relief, the gratitude, the small sense of security a loaf of bread can provide. The baker pauses, looking over the emptied baskets and the sunlit streets. Tomorrow, he says softly, we feed the workers again. But today, we fed hearts. You smile, feeling a warm sense of accomplishment. The act of baking, once just a curiosity, now feels profoundly purposeful. It isn't simply about flour and water, it's about sustaining life, creating community, and connecting the mundane to something timeless. As you walk back to the courtyard, the smell of cooling bread and faint smoke follows you like a memory. The sun dips lower, casting a soft glow over the clay walls. You take a deep breath, letting the scents and sounds settle into your mind. The baker sits near the dying embers of the oven, hands resting on knees, eyes half closed in quiet contemplation. You sit beside him, feeling the warmth of the day fade gently, the rhythm of labor and life flowing into a lull of contentment. For a moment, you understand that this is the heartbeat of civilization, not the grand temples or the kings, but the small, patient, repetitive acts that sustain people day by day. Bread, you realize, is the quiet pulse of a city, as steady and enduring as the rising sun. The next morning, you awaken to a soft, golden haze spilling into the courtyard. The baker is already tending the tanur, feeding it with small bundles of reeds and dried dung that flare briefly, casting flickering shadows over the walls. The scent of smoke and warming clay drifts lazily through the air, wrapping around you like a familiar blanket. Today, the baker announces with a grin, we explore storage and preservation. You follow him to a shaded corner of the courtyard, where neat rows of clay jars and woven baskets wait patiently. Bread is fragile, he explains, but it's also precious. We can't let it spoil before it reaches the people. He lifts a freshly baked loaf and inspects it. This one will be eaten today. That one, he gestures toward a small jar, needs to last for a week. The jars are fascinating, rounded, sealed with reed lids, and sometimes coated in resin or pitch. Some are small enough to fit in a single hand, others could hold dozens of loaves. You notice the slight variations in shape and texture, evidence of different artisans' techniques. Historians still argue whether these storage methods were standardized across Mesopotamia or varied wildly by city and household. Standing here, among the jars and baskets, it seems both true and untrue. Some care deeply about uniformity, while others rely on practicality over perfection. You help the baker carefully slide loaves into the jars. Each piece fits snugly, like a puzzle. The baker demonstrates a technique for lining the bottom with straw to absorb excess moisture. Prevent mold, he explains. Mold is the enemy of civilization. You laugh softly, imagining an army of tiny green invaders plotting against human survival. Nearby, a small apprentice is crushing herbs into a powder and sprinkling it over some of the loaves before sealing them. Keeps pests away, he says proudly, and adds a touch of flavor. You peek into a jar and inhale the faint aroma of coriander and thyme mixed with warm bread. It's subtle, comforting, and strangely ceremonial. The baker nods approvingly. A loaf saved is a loaf respected. We honor it by taking care of it. As the day progresses, you observe how storage and distribution are intertwined. Some loaves will be taken to the riverfront for traders, others to nearby households, and still more to communal kitchens. The baker demonstrates how to wrap loaves in reed mats or linen cloths, keeping them dry and insulated. The city runs on timing, he says. Bread has to arrive fresh, or it's useless. You begin to notice patterns in the people passing through the courtyard. Children carry small clay cups, likely for barley water or beer. Women pause to exchange nods or words of gratitude. Men lug sacks of grain to the mill. Even the smallest actions contribute to the intricate dance of sustenance and survival. A thought strikes you. This system is ancient, yet remarkably efficient. Without coins, written contracts, or refrigeration, the city manages to feed hundreds, perhaps thousands of people every day. And it all begins here, in the quiet attention paid to the humble loaf. At midday, a small commotion draws your attention. A man from the upper terrace brings a batch of half-baked flatbreads to the bakery. They need finishing, he explains. Oven too small where we started. The baker examines them carefully and nods. We'll finish them, make them proper. You help by dusting the surfaces with flour, adjusting their shape, and sliding them carefully into the oven. The fire crackles, and you feel the familiar warmth on your face. The smell of baking bread is intoxicating, a blend of smoke, earth, and faint sweetness that seems to linger in your nostrils long after the loaves are removed. The finished breads are softer, slightly puffed, edges browned just enough to add texture. They're carefully stored in clay jars and woven baskets, ready for transport. You marvel at the transformation. From simple dough to a loaf that can last days, nourishes a family, and bridges the gap between effort and reward. During a break, the baker shares a story of a scribe who once attempted to catalog every loaf baked in the city over a single month. He went mad, the baker says, chuckling. Too many numbers, too many crumbs. You laugh along, picturing the poor man buried in clay tablets, trying to account for every last piece of bread. You realize there's a rhythm to all of this. Kneading, baking, storing, delivering. Repetition is part of survival. Even the smallest loaf must be accounted for, respected, and preserved. You can see why historians still debate the nuances of early Mesopotamian food economies. So much depends on context, technique, and human care. The baker leans back against a jar, brushing flour from his hands. "Every loaf has a journey," he murmurs. "Some go to the river, some to the temple, some to a child's belly. But every journey begins here, with attention, care, and patience." Later, you help prepare bundles for the northern districts. The baker instructs you to wrap loaves in linen, seal them with bits of straw, and carefully place them in the clay jars. Do not cram them, he warns. Let them breathe. Bread is alive until it is eaten. You follow his instructions meticulously, noting the small gaps between loaves, the gentle touch needed to avoid breaking their crust. A child from the nearby street stops to watch. You hand him a small, imperfect loaf. His eyes light up as he cradles it, as if holding treasure. You wonder how many generations have experienced this same joy. Bread passed hand to hand, sustaining life and hope. Nearby, a young woman sprinkles a few herbs over the remaining jars, her hands moving in small, careful circles. "Keeps the bugs away," she says, "and makes it smell nice for the gods." The baker nods silently, approving of her diligence. As the afternoon drifts on, the courtyard becomes quieter. The ovens cool, the jars are sealed, and the last bundles are carried away. You sit beneath a date palm, the shadows lengthening, and breathe in the faint scent of bread, smoke, and dust. It lingers in your clothes, your hair, your hands, an invisible memory of the day's work. The baker joins you, stretching his back. "Tomorrow we deliver again," he says. "But today we preserved. That's just as important." You nod, reflecting on the intricate cycle of baking, storage, and distribution. Without preservation, the city would falter. Without delivery, survival would stall. Each loaf is a testament to foresight, care, and human ingenuity. A small yet profound act that sustains life. The sun dips lower, painting the courtyard in soft orange and gold. You lean back, feeling the day's heat fade from your skin. Around you, the city hums softly, the faint shuffle of feet, distant laughter, a donkey braying somewhere. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of civilization, the slow, deliberate beat of hands shaping dough, fire baking bread, jars preserving sustenance, wash over you. In that quiet, you realize something vital. The work here, mundane and repetitive as it seems, is the foundation of all else. The temples, the markets, even the distant palaces, all exist because someone cared for the loaves, kept them safe, and ensured they reached the people. Civilization rises slowly, loaf by loaf, hand by hand, day by day. The baker sighs, brushing flour from his hands one last time. "Sleep well tonight," he murmurs. "The bread is safe, the city is fed, and tomorrow it begins again." The morning sun filters through the latticework above the courtyard, casting geometric patterns onto the walls. You wake to the soft warmth and the faint aroma of smoldering reeds still lingering from last night's fires. The baker is already busy at the oven, adjusting coals with long tongs, checking the temperature, and humming softly. Today, he tells you, the focus is on innovation and experimentation, slightly unusual for a place that often relies on tradition. You follow him to a long wooden table covered in bowls, small jars, and scraps of herbs. Various grains are piled neatly: barley, emmer wheat, a few odd samples of millet. "We try new blends today," he explains. "Sometimes the gods like change, sometimes the workers do, and sometimes we just get curious." You pick up a handful of barley, letting it slip through your fingers. The grains are rough, earthy, and slightly sweet. You taste one, chewy and nutty, and feel an odd sense of connection to countless hands that have handled these very kernels before you. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians prioritized taste or texture in their daily bread. But standing here, inhaling the warm mix of grains, you suspect both mattered more than we give them credit for. The baker demonstrates how to combine grains to create a balanced dough. Barley gives structure, wheat gives softness, millet adds a subtle chewiness. You begin mixing carefully, water trickling into the flour like a quiet river, your hands kneading until the dough becomes pliable and smooth. Each fold incorporates air, encouraging fermentation, giving life to the mixture. Nearby, a young apprentice experiments with flavorings: crushed coriander seeds, a pinch of cumin, a dab of date syrup. The scents rise, mingling with smoke and warm dough, forming a heady, intoxicating perfume. You laugh softly as a tiny cloud of flour dust rises around you, catching sunlight like suspended snowflakes. Messy, but rewarding, the baker murmurs, brushing his hands together. Once the dough is ready, the baker demonstrates shaping techniques. Some loaves are round, others long and flat, a few twisted or patterned. He presses his fingers into the surface, leaving faint indentations that will remain after baking. Shape tells a story, he says quietly. Sometimes for the temple, sometimes for the market. A loaf is more than food, it's communication. You try shaping a small round loaf. Your fingers tremble slightly as you press, turn, and smooth. The baker corrects your technique gently, showing you how to create tension in the crust to encourage even rising. You notice a subtle difference already. The dough responds differently depending on how you handle it, soft in one spot, resistant in another. As you work, a curious neighbor peeks into the courtyard, a woman with a basket of dried figs. She offers a few, and the baker takes them thoughtfully. Sweetness for experimentation, he says. You slice a fig and knead it gently into a small ball of dough. The fragrance of ripe fruit blends with grain and smoke. When it's time for the oven, you watch the baker demonstrate sliding the experimental loaves onto the walls. Heat rises in waves, the stone radiating warmth that is almost tactile. The loaves cling briefly, puffing slightly before browning evenly. One small round loaf cracks at the top, releasing a whisper of steam. The baker smiles faintly. Imperfection is part of discovery, he says. You nod, appreciating that even the gods, or maybe especially the gods, might enjoy a little unpredictability. While the loaves bake, the baker discusses storage options. Some will be taken to the temple, others to the workers, a few kept for families in the far districts. You assist in lining clay jars with straw, sealing them with reeds, and ensuring airflow is sufficient to prevent spoilage. Preservation, he explains, is as much a part of innovation as the recipe itself. A loaf wasted is knowledge lost. Historians still debate whether such experimental baking was widespread or a rare luxury in ancient Mesopotamia. Standing here, it feels like a natural part of city life. The curiosity of bakers, their willingness to test flavors and textures, speaks to a society that valued creativity within routine. Even in a civilization structured around strict temple hierarchies, there was room for small acts of ingenuity. A small apprentice presents a loaf with a twist of date syrup pressed into the surface. The aroma is sweet but subtle, and when sliced, the dough reveals a soft, golden interior flecked with sugary streaks. You taste it cautiously, and the flavor surprises you. Rich, warm, with a gentle chewiness. The baker nods approvingly. For the festival, he says, or maybe just for those who appreciate a treat. As the day progresses, deliveries are made. You help carry jars of loaves to the temple and nearby homes. Children run alongside, eager for crumbs, while women nod their thanks. You notice that experimental loaves draw attention. Their unusual shapes and flavors spark curiosity and delight. Even in a city structured around predictable patterns, small surprises are appreciated. The baker smiles as he observes this. Even small variations, he says, can teach us something. Taste, texture, aroma, they all matter. Innovation isn't always grand. Sometimes it's a whisper in flour.
By late afternoon, the courtyard quiets. Ovens cool slowly, jars are sealed, and remaining experimental loaves are set aside for tomorrow's distribution. You sit beneath the shade of a date palm, feeling the warmth of the day settle into your muscles. The baker sits beside you, brushing flour from his hands, eyes half closed. Every loaf we bake, he murmurs, teaches us something about the world, the people, even ourselves. You reflect on the process, the mixing, shaping, sliding into the oven, preserving, and delivering. Bread, you realize, is more than food. It is experiment, communication, survival, and care, all kneaded together in a simple yet profound cycle. The ancient city thrives on this rhythm, and through it, you feel an intimate connection to countless generations who have done the same. The baker rises, stretching, and gestures toward the horizon where the sun casts long shadows across the rooftops. Tomorrow, he says softly, we return to the streets. We feed the city again. But today, we pushed boundaries. You nod, savoring the warmth of the fading light and the lingering aroma of baked grain. Innovation, tradition, and human hands, all intertwined in the humble yet profound act of creating bread. You realize that even within routine, there is room for curiosity, for small joys, and for discovery. The courtyard falls into quiet calm as the day ends. A few loaves remain in jars, patiently waiting for morning. The baker sits near the last embers, hands resting on knees, eyes thoughtful. You lean back beside him, letting the gentle rhythm of the day's work lull you into a meditative stillness. Bread, you think, is the subtle pulse of the city, steady, nourishing, endlessly inventive. And in that pulse, you feel the quiet heartbeat of history itself. Dawn seeps slowly over the city, brushing rooftops with pale gold. You rise to the familiar scent of smoke and warm clay, mixed with the faint tang of fermented barley. The baker is already at the oven, tending embers and adjusting coals with practiced care. Today, he tells you, the focus is on transportation and distribution, moving the bread from the bakery to the farthest reaches of the city and beyond. Baking is only half the job, he says, gesturing to stacks of woven baskets and clay jars. The rest is ensuring it reaches those who need it. Bread that doesn't travel, well, it's just dough. You follow him as he lifts a bundle of loaves onto a wooden cart. The wheels creak softly under the weight, and the sun catches the dust in the street, making it sparkle like tiny stars. A donkey waits patiently, bridle loose, ears flicking at passing children, and a distant call to the river. You climb aboard beside the baker, gripping the edge as he nudges the animal forward. The streets are alive with early morning activity. Vendors call out, children chase each other, and artisans set up their stalls. You notice the contrast between this bustling life and the quiet temple courtyards. Here, life is tactile, chaotic, and immediate, hands touching clay, straw, and grain at every turn. You marvel at how the same loaves, baked with such care, now must survive dust, heat, and jostling to nourish the city. The baker steers the donkey carefully, navigating narrow alleys and uneven stones. Occasionally, you help lift a basket over a low doorway or steady a jar on the cart. You feel a sense of responsibility. The bread you carry represents sustenance, survival, and connection for countless people. Historians still argue whether ancient Mesopotamian cities had formal delivery routes or if distribution relied primarily on social networks and temple oversight. But observing this, it seems both systems likely existed in parallel.
The first stop is a small household near the river. A woman opens the door, hands lifted in a greeting of gratitude. She takes the loaves with care, inspecting them briefly, and sets them on a low wooden table. Children peek around her legs, eyes bright and hopeful. One boy tugs gently at the baker's sleeve, and he breaks off a small loaf, handing it to him with a smile. You watch the child's face light up, crumbs clinging to his lips. Even the smallest loaf counts, the baker murmurs as you move to the next household. Every piece sustains life.
You begin to notice patterns in distribution. The wealthier families receive finer wheat loaves, while the workers get denser barley loaves, sturdy and long-lasting. There's a rhythm to it, who receives what, when, and in what quantity, calculated with care and experience. You lift jars and baskets, feeling their weight and the subtle warmth of freshly baked bread. The city feels alive in these small interactions, its pulse carried in the hands that pass loaves from baker to citizen. On the way to the next district, the baker explains some of the logistical challenges. Streets are narrow, sometimes crowded with carts or animals, and the midday sun can make the bread spoil quickly if not protected. He shows you a method of lining baskets with woven reeds and linen cloths, which insulates the loaves and protects them from dust. A loaf ruined on the way is a loaf wasted, he says, and waste is unacceptable. You help pack the loaves carefully, sliding jars in, weaving straw around them, and setting smaller loaves on top. The donkey hums softly, its gait steady. You take a moment to breathe in the scents around you: baked grain, dry clay, river mud, faint herbs, and feel a connection to centuries of bakers and couriers who have walked these same streets. At a small communal kitchen, you find a group of women and children waiting. They kneel on woven mats, hands resting in their laps, faces lit with quiet anticipation. The baker unloads baskets, and the women immediately start dividing loaves for their families. Some break them into smaller pieces for the children, others wrap them for later meals. You offer a loaf to a little girl who accepts it with wide eyes, hugging it to her chest as though it were treasure. Nearby, a young man takes a loaf, dips it into a cup of barley beer, and bites carefully. You notice the simple pleasure in each act, the nourishment, the ritual, the sense of community. Historians still debate whether such communal kitchens were primarily a temple function or a civic one. But witnessing this, you see how seamlessly the two could blend in daily life. The afternoon sun climbs high, turning streets into a furnace. You make your way toward the outer districts, baskets and jars carefully balanced. A sudden gust of wind lifts dust and straw into the air, and you help steady the load. The baker mutters a few words under his breath, some sort of old saying about wind, dust, and bread. You laugh quietly, wiping sweat and grit from your eyes. At the farthest district, you meet a man with a small herd of goats and a few children playing nearby. The baker hands over jars of loaves. For nourishment, he says, and for patience, a fed city is a calm city. The man nods, tipping his head respectfully. The children run off with pieces of bread, laughing, the sound echoing down the dusty alley. On the return trip, you reflect on the scale of the city's food network. The baker navigates back through winding streets, occasionally adjusting baskets or offering small loaves to passers-by. You realize that bread is both literal and symbolic sustenance, feeding bodies, building trust, and creating a rhythm of daily life that binds everyone together. Every loaf delivered is an invisible thread in the social fabric. Back at the bakery, the sun begins to dip behind distant rooftops. The courtyard smells faintly of smoke and cooling bread. The baker sets down the remaining jars and wipes his hands. Delivery is as important as baking, he says. Without it, everything else fails. Bread in the oven is potential. Bread in hands is life.
You nod, realizing that today you have witnessed more than transportation. You have seen how civilization depends on care, attention, and repetition. The act of moving bread may seem mundane, but it sustains the pulse of the city. Without such diligence, even the best loaves would amount to nothing. As evening falls, the streets calm, and the city exhales. You sit beside the baker near the cooling ovens, hands resting on your knees, letting the warmth of the day seep into your skin. Somewhere in the distance, a child hums a tune while nibbling on a loaf. The smell of straw, clay, and grain lingers in the air, mingling with the soft twilight. The baker sighs, leaning back against a jar. "Tomorrow," he says softly, "we bake again. But today we carried life in our hands. That is no small thing." You nod, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The city rests, nourished and connected, its rhythm sustained by the quiet, patient work of bakers and couriers. You close your eyes, letting the distant sounds of the river and the faint shuffle of evening footsteps ease your mind. Bread, you realize, is civilization in motion, a simple yet profound force that binds people, streets, and time itself. The morning is soft and calm, the sun rising slowly over the clay rooftops, painting the city in muted golds and ambers. You awaken to the familiar sense of smoke, straw, and freshly baked bread lingering in the air. The baker is already at work, stirring coals in the tanure and arranging bundles of flour, barley, and wheat at his side. Today, he explains, the focus is on teaching apprentices, passing down knowledge, technique, and subtle artistry to the next generation. You follow him to a long, low bench where 3 young apprentices sit cross-legged, flour dusting their hair and hands. The baker gestures for you to kneel beside him. "Observation is the first lesson," he murmurs. "Then patience, then action." You watch as he demonstrates kneading techniques, folding dough over itself with practiced motions, encouraging air into the mixture while maintaining even tension. Each movement seems effortless yet precise, honed over decades. Historians still debate how formalized apprenticeship systems were in Mesopotamia. Some suggest informal, family-based instruction. Others argue for organized mentorship in city bakeries. Standing here, it seems clear that hands-on guidance, patient repetition, and observation were crucial components of any baker's education. You try your hands at kneading again, mimicking the baker's motions. Flour sticks to your palms, grains pressing into your skin, and the dough begins to take on a cohesive, springy form. The baker adjusts your technique gently, guiding your fingers, whispering advice on pressure and rhythm. One of the apprentices giggles when a small puff of flour explodes as you fold, and even the baker smiles softly. Humor, he explains later, is part of teaching, makes mistakes less intimidating and learning more memorable. Nearby, one apprentice experiments with shaping techniques, twisting, braiding, and stamping patterns into small loaves. Each shape tells a story, a subtle mark of identity or intention. The baker inspects each one, nodding, occasionally pointing out minor adjustments. Shape affects not only appearance, he explains, but texture, baking time, and even taste. A braid, for example, bakes differently from a flat disc. You must understand these nuances. Once the dough is ready, the apprentices prepare the loaves for the oven. You slide a small loaf onto the oven wall, feeling the heat radiate through the wooden paddle. The dough clings briefly, then puffs slightly as the fire works its magic. The baker watches, eyes squinting in the glow, ready to correct any mistakes. While the loaves bake, he explains the subtleties of temperature, timing, and fire management. Different flours require different heat, he says, and ambient humidity can alter rising. A too hot oven scorches the crust, too cool, and the interior remains doughy. Small variations can make the difference between edible bread and disaster. Baking is science, he says softly, but it's also art and patience. You taste a small sample of an apprentice's finished loaf, noticing the gentle chew, faint sweetness, and subtle hints of herbs kneaded in earlier. Even in its simplicity, it carries layers of learning, experience, and trial and error. You realize that every loaf baked under guidance carries not just ingredients, but accumulated knowledge, passed hand to hand, generation to generation.
The baker demonstrates a few advanced techniques, stamping designs into loaves for ceremonies, creating small pockets of sweet fillings, and adjusting dough hydration to alter texture. Each action is deliberate, rhythmic, and methodical. You try replicating a stamped design, fingers trembling slightly, and the baker guides you with quiet encouragement. The apprentice next to you struggles as well, but smiles triumphantly when his loaf emerges from the oven with a faint pattern intact.
You begin to appreciate how much subtlety and care go into teaching these skills. Patience is paramount, not rushing, not scolding, but guiding. The apprentices watch and learn, gradually internalizing the rhythm of kneading, shaping, and baking, their hands absorbing knowledge the mind alone cannot hold. After several hours, the baker brings out a tray of loaves and asks you to help distribute them among the apprentices. They receive their portion with bright eyes, examining the texture, scent, and taste. One boy holds a loaf close, sniffing the faint aroma of baked grain mixed with subtle herbs. He bites tentatively, then smiles broadly. The baker nods quietly. Understanding comes through experience, he says. Taste teaches what theory cannot. You notice that teaching here extends beyond technique. The baker shares small anecdotes about mistakes he once made, peculiar reactions of fire, or curious preferences of the temple priests. Humor, history, and practical wisdom are woven together with the tactile lessons of dough and fire. It's a holistic education where every element reinforces the others. Historians still argue whether baker apprentices were trained primarily for household production, temple offerings, or urban commerce. Observing the integration of skill, creativity, and responsibility here, it seems all three purposes coexisted, blending naturally into daily practice. By late afternoon, the courtyard has quieted. The apprentices rest, hands still dusted with flour, eyes bright with curiosity and mild exhaustion. The baker sits beside you, brushing flour from his hands, eyes thoughtful. Teaching is different from baking, he says. We create not only bread, but bakers. You reflect on the cycle you've witnessed today: kneading, shaping, baking, tasting, guiding, correcting. Each step carries intention, care, and responsibility. You realize that passing knowledge is as vital as baking itself. Without it, tradition would falter, and the city would slowly forget the pulse of its daily life. The sun sinks lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard. You and the baker gather the remaining loaves, sealing them carefully for evening distribution or storage. The apprentices watch, absorbing final techniques and small lessons in handling, preserving, and respecting the bread. You pause to breathe, inhaling the faint aroma of cooling loaves, smoke, and the warm clay surrounding you. The courtyard feels alive yet serene, a place of creation, learning, and connection. Every loaf baked today is a testament not only to sustenance, but to mentorship, care, and continuity. The baker leans back, hands on knees, eyes half closed. Tomorrow, he says softly, we bake for the streets again. But today, we baked knowledge. You nod, appreciating the subtle triumph in that statement. Bread, you realize, carries history, not just in its ingredients or shape, but in the hands that shaped it, the minds that guided it,
and the care invested in its creation. You close your eyes, letting the lingering scent of bread and the gentle hum of the courtyard settle into your mind. The apprentices' laughter, the subtle crackle of embers, and the soft, dusty warmth of the day fade into a meditative calm. Bread, you understand, is civilization and education intertwined, steady, patient, and profoundly human. The morning light drifts lazily over the rooftops, softening the sharp angles of clay and brick with a golden haze. You rise, still carrying the faint aroma of bread and straw from yesterday, and step into the courtyard where the baker is tending the last embers of the tanur. Today, he says, is a culmination, a weaving together of all you've learned: baking, shaping, preservation, distribution, and teaching. You kneel beside him at the large wooden table, brushing flour from your hands. Several small apprentices have already arrived, eyes bright with curiosity and eagerness. The baker gestures to an assortment of grains: barley, emmer wheat, millet, and a few small additions: crushed dates, sesame seeds, and a tiny bowl of honeyed water. Today, he murmurs, we craft loaves for every purpose: temple, household, festival, and experiment. We bake history itself. You begin mixing the flour and water, folding, pressing, and turning, feeling the dough come alive under your hands. The texture is familiar now, almost meditative, and the rhythm of kneading, the push, fold, and turn, feels like a heartbeat, echoing centuries of practice. The baker watches, occasionally guiding your fingers, pointing out subtle adjustments that improve elasticity, air pockets, or texture. You feel both humbled and connected to countless hands that have performed these same motions.
Nearby, the apprentices shape loaves under the baker's careful supervision. Some are round, some flat, others braided or stamped with intricate designs. Each loaf tells a story, carries intention, and will fulfill a specific role. The baker explains, a temple loaf requires a certain weight and symmetry. Household loaves must travel and sustain. Experimental loaves test flavors and technique. Historians still debate whether these distinctions were formalized or flexible, but observing this delicate attention, it seems both were possible, depending on context. You attempt a small braid, pressing gently to maintain tension. A slight tear appears in one strand, but the baker merely smiles. Imperfection teaches, he says. Every mistake is a lesson baked into memory. You nod, feeling the wisdom in his quiet words. The ovens are prepared, coals glowing warmly, the air thick with anticipation. You slide your first experimental loaf into the wall, feeling its heat radiate through the wooden paddle. It puffs slightly, cracks forming gently across the crust, releasing a faint, sweet aroma. Nearby, a jar of partially baked loaves waits for preservation techniques. You help line the bottom with straw, add a sprinkle of crushed herbs, and carefully seal them for distribution later. The day stretches on, a gentle rhythm of kneading, shaping, baking, and packaging. Every action seems layered with centuries of tradition and innovation. The baker moves among the apprentices and you, offering small corrections, tips, and anecdotes. He shares stories of unusual ingredients, failed experiments, and festival loaves. Humor and history are woven together seamlessly, making every moment an education and a quiet joy. Mid-afternoon, the loaves are ready for distribution. You join the baker in carrying baskets and jars through the winding streets, delivering fresh bread to households, communal kitchens, and temple courtyards. Children run alongside, laughter mingling with the soft shuffle of feet. Families greet the baker and apprentices with nods, smiles, and quiet thanks. Each delivery, each exchange reinforces the idea that bread is not only sustenance, but connection, a binding force in the life of the city. You notice small details: the careful way a mother wraps leftover bread for her child, The precise balance in which a young man carries multiple loaves, the subtle patterns of gratitude expressed in nods or quiet smiles. Each loaf, each gesture contributes to the city's rhythm and to the enduring pulse of civilization itself. By late afternoon, the courtyard empties, ovens cool, and the remaining jars of bread are carefully sealed for tomorrow's distribution. The apprentices rest, faces flushed with exertion and satisfaction. The baker sits beside you, hands dusted with flour, eyes thoughtful. "Everything we've done these past days," he murmurs, "connects life, community, and history. Every loaf is a story, every crumb a memory."
You reflect on the journey and milling grains to kneading and baking, from preserving loaves for transport to distributing them to the people, and finally teaching the next generation. Each step is deliberate, thoughtful, and essential. Bread, you realize, is more than food. It is labor, art, education, and devotion, a quiet yet profound thread running through time. As evening settles, the courtyard glows softly in the amber light. You sit beneath a date palm, inhaling the faint scent of cooling bread, straw, and clay. The city hums quietly in the distance, the shuffle of feet, the laughter of children, the low bray of a donkey. The baker leans back, eyes half closed, and exhales a long, contented breath. You join him in quiet reflection, letting the calm of the day and the lingering aroma of bread soothe your mind. The apprentices rest nearby, occasionally breaking a small piece of loaf between them, tasting, laughing softly. Civilization, you realize, is sustained by these patient, deliberate acts, by hands that knead, shape, and carry sustenance with care, thought, and skill. As the sun dips below the rooftops, the warmth of the day fades gently into the soft embrace of evening. The city exhales, quieting its steps, its voices, its movements. You feel the subtle vibration of life slowing, the pulse of civilization softening into a gentle rhythm. The aroma of bread lingers faintly, sweet, earthy, and comforting, a reminder of labor completed, sustenance provided, and knowledge passed along. The baker sits nearby, a silhouette against the fading light, hands resting, eyes serene. You inhale deeply, letting the sense of straw, smoke, and grain mingle with the fading warmth on your skin. Every loaf, every action, every lesson from today feels like a thread woven into the larger tapestry of life. You notice the calm in the courtyard, the faint hum of distant water, the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Thoughts drift, gentle and unhurried, like the cooling smoke from the oven. You imagine the hands that shaped these loaves over centuries, the children who will taste them, the people who will carry them home, and the apprentices who will one day teach others. Civilization, you realize, is quietly sustained in these small, consistent acts, nourishment, care, and repetition forming the heartbeat of the city. Allow your mind to rest here, in the soft glow of fading light, in the lingering scent of baked grain and warm clay. Let the day's rhythm dissolve slowly, like steam rising from a freshly baked loaf, until all that remains is calm, contentment, and gentle, steady breathing. Tomorrow, the ovens will fire again, the dough will rise, and the city will awaken. But for now, you simply rest, surrounded by warmth, history, and the quiet satisfaction of having been part of something enduring. Tomorrow, the ovens will fire again, the dough will rise, and the city will awaken. But for now, you simply rest, surrounded by warmth, history, and the quiet satisfaction of having been part of something enduring. Sweet dreams.